Hello, hello, hello. I am back with another battle report for this week, a 4th of July special for the people in the United States watching out there, like myself. This time I was going up against Chaos Space Marines. This is actually my first game against Chaos Space Marines in 8th edition. I was pretty excited to see what they can do. Chaos is always a very varied army. They're not always the strongest, but they can bring a lot of different things because they have so many options, and I always find that really interesting. I have kind of a soft spot in my heart for Chaos as well because when I was much younger, I don't remember which edition this was in. I think it was fourth, but it may have been fifth. There was an army you could play where you could have Slanesh Lords that were unshootable and unchargeable, and then they could deep strike in Demonettes that could assault that turn, which was something that demons could do back then. So I pretty much terrorized my state for the most part with that army list, and that was the first time I ever wrote a list that sort of broke the game or was a really strong tournament contender. Back before I knew about forums and anything like that, I just constructed it over time, so that was kind of a rewarding experience. But anyways, to this game, uh, yet another, if you've been watching my battle reports, game that was pretty one-sided. I haven't really been getting any complaints about my orcs in terms of them being like too powerful or anything like that. I generally think that people don't mind losing to orcs because they're a very fair army. If you get crushed by someone playing four knights or someone playing a bunch of devastator squads with like Gilliman or something like that, it feels a little cheesier. Seven Storm Ravens, any of those, lists making the rounds on the internet right now. I don't think orcs are in that same tier of competitiveness. I think if I was going to rank them, I would say that orcs at the tip-top condition are probably at the highest part of the mid-tier, not quite in that rarefied air just yet, but we'll see how that changes with missions and things like that, because I think orcs are probably the best army in the game for missions. But yeah, I mean, orcs just bring a lot of models to the table, and they come at you, and then you and your opponent have a nice go of it, and whoever wins wins. So people don't ever seem to be upset that they lost to orcs or anything like that, which is good because I don't like to ruin anybody's hobby. While I'm trying to figure out competitive options and improve myself and things like that. It's always a bit of a balance you have to do, and this was something I struggle with Age of Sigmar because people that play that game locally are so non-competitive, whereas I'm a competitive focused player, so it's very difficult for me to test my list and get feedback and learn when everybody's playing generally more soft armies, which is not as much the case with 40k. 40k has a much larger competitive community, which is kind of how it's always been. Fantasy's always been a little bit more for the older players that maybe aren't so competitive anymore and things like that. But that's neither here nor there. It's just good to get more games in and not develop a reputation as that guy or anything like that. It's difficult to make that stick when somebody's just bringing a bunch of orcs to the table. So I did change my list compared to the last game I had against Dark Angels. I did not like how the Rockets played in that list at all. I actually completely did a 180 on my opinion of Rockets. Originally, I thought they were pretty good with boys, but playing them on the tabletop, it's just clear that they don't work. A Green Tide army has to advance every turn. It just has to. Its primary goal is to get into combat, and you need that extra d6 worth of inches. You can't just be walking up 5 inches and shooting these rockets every turn. It's not going to pan out. The only way you could probably do that is if you took shoot-a-boys for every unit, and then even then I don't think that would work very well because against any kind of like mechanized army or anything like that, you just need to get into combat. It's important. So Hate on threes is just much better than Hate on fives, obviously, and Hate on fives with bolters, you're never going to punch through. It's not a good strategy. So I dropped all the rockets and I went a little heavier on the characters. I put Grotznik back in my list. He's been in a couple revisions, but I haven't really played with him much. Originally, I was trying to get two Pain Boys in because I like having any defensive buffs across my entire army, which you can't do with one pain boy. You need two because the pain boy can pretty easily hit 3 units. I have 6 units, so obviously I need two of them. But I just decided that I'm mostly taking him for the extra things he can do. So not only is he a pain boy, but he's a good fighter. He has a power claw that hits on threes because he's weapon skill 2, as opposed to a pain boy which normally hits on fours. He's a little bit more resilient because he has like a 5+ feel no pain save basically. He has toughness 5. Um, and then he can heal. Like I'm running a lot more weird boys now, and they perils pretty often because of the weird boy mandatory bonus for orcs within 10 inches. So being able to heal the weird boys up so that they don't kill themselves is very strong as well. And then he also has kind of a cute little interaction where if he doesn't have any orc infantry within 3 inches of him, he must charge the closest enemy unit. Um, Even if he withdrew or ran that turn. So it's really easy in some situations if he was in combat. You can withdraw on your turn, make sure that there's no orc infantry within 3 inches of him, and then charge him back in, even though he fell back that turn. And that way you can get like another charge with him, so that he goes before your opponent's units can start going and stuff like that. So just little interactions like that made me like him. I also decided to kind of go up with weird boys again. My early lists I was running like 7 or 8, but that's too many. So this time I have 4, and I think that's a lot better. It's really easy to get D6 mortal wounds with orc weird boys, and they're very difficult to deny the witch on because they can get really high casting values. So they're actually quite reliable as far as getting D6 mortal wounds off, and if you use that sparingly, it really helps out against certain armies. So like armies that have a couple flyers, I can take one down. I can get myself out of some of these more difficult combats, as I showed during the battle report. Like I was able to get rid of a lot of Terminators. I was able to soften up some Demon Princes and things like that. It's a really good like extra bit of oomph for the army, where I'm already putting out so much melee pressure that now it's like, okay, I'm locking you down in melee with this huge front, and then I have these weird boys, and I can start, sniping some things, putting some mortal wounds in here and there, and it just makes the game toilet bowl, I guess, on my opponent a lot faster, which is exactly what I want to happen. So those are the main changes. I am running Zard Snark as my warlord for now with the +1 attack trait. He's pretty reliable as far as getting the charge, just because he's so fast, and 6 attacks with a power claw that hits on 2s is very powerful. He's like my primary can opener and things like that. The reason I had the rockets in the last iteration of the list is because I need help dealing with transports and mechanized armies and things like that. So I decided instead of the rockets, I would take, him and upgrade one of my other war bosses to have a power claw. Because even though I think power claws are overpriced and not very good, they are good on a war boss, just because a war boss has 4 attack space instead of 3 for the knob, and he hits on 3s with it instead of 4s. And it's a little bit easier to put him where he needs to be because the war bosses are so fast since they're on bikes and all that stuff. So some small changes there, but I think they improved the list overall. And like I said, I just wasn't happy with the way that it played against the Dark Angels army. So I wanted to make some changes before this game. I think my opponent Sam's list is a pretty decent all-rounder. It's not super competitive. Obviously, bikes are not real strong right now for any army. They're probably a little overpriced for what they do. I mean, they do give you a little bit more resilience with the wounds and the extra toughness and stuff like that. The problem is that also makes it a little bit more rewarding for shooting them with like anti-tank guns and stuff like that, which almost every army has. So you're like, oh, here, have this more expensive 2 wound model and stuff like that, than just have this one tactical marine. And then their extra speed doesn't really get them anything compared to having a unit in a rhino or something like that. I mean, they're not particularly great in combat. They're just chaos marines, at the end of the day. And I mean, they're good for objective play and stuff like that, but you could do the same thing with a fully mechanized army. Um, so yeah, I don't think bikes are good. Period. Right now, I don't think orc bikes are good. I don't think Chaos Space Marine or regular Space Marine bikes are good. And most people seem to have come to the same conclusion. It's just that they're not particularly strong right now. We'll see what happens when some of the codexes start coming out. Not having a sorcerer really surprised me. I've watched several of Sam's games, and he always brings a sorcerer just because the Heretic Astartes psychic powers are some of the best in the game. Warp time is extremely brutal, and what's the other one? Prescience is also extremely strong. Um, so I thought he would definitely have a sorcerer of some kind or something like that. But he didn't decide to bring one. We talked about that, and he said that's pretty much going to be a staple of his list. He just didn't bring one this time, for whatever reason. And then the Terminators were a little bit of a strange inclusion. They're super all or nothing. They do a lot of damage with double lightning claws everywhere, but they have no guns. So if they fail that charge when they come in from deep strike, they just sit there and are probably going to die for nothing. And they can't walk across the board because they have no transport or anything. So the best they could do is be like some kind of counterattack unit if your opponent's playing an extremely aggressive army like mine is, but that's not every game. So I think having either a Land Raider or more of a traditional Terminator unit with like some combi weapons and stuff like that is definitely the way to go. Again, that's how, when I've watched Sam's games in the past, he usually plays. Everything else seems okay. The one Demon Prince with the axe certainly should be Talons. Talons are, I think, pretty much always the best way to go. They're just so good. Two sets of Malefic Talons on a Demon Prince is almost the best possible loadout. Wings are great. Marker Corn's fine. In this list, I would probably prefer them to be able to be psychers, so like Mark of Nurgle or something like that, but Sam likes to play on a little bit of the fluffier side, he told me, so he pretty much plays like a Night Lord's army, which you might notice from like his Rhino doors and stuff like that, and I guess Night Lords, I don't know the lore very well, but they don't typically use demons very much, and they don't use psychers very much, so he kind of, if he was going to bring some demons, he didn't want to bring psychers on top of it, so that was his rationale, which is consistent with what I've seen him do. He'll normally bring a sorcerer or sorcerer lord or whatever, but then he doesn't bring any demon princes. He'll bring like vehicles and havocs and all that kind of stuff. I really like the havocs with the autocannons. I think that's really a good unit. They do die a little quickly, but that's just kind of how 5-man marine units go. Their defense is really being able to be in cover all the time, and then their range. So but autocannons are really a really good choice for them. They put out a good volume of fire. You can get them like reroll ones from HQs and stuff like that, and then they're really going to be good against um, like medium infantry and lighter vehicles. So that's a really good inclusion. I also think Hellbrutes are great. I've always had a soft spot for dreadnoughts, and then the Hellbrutes have a little bit of extra flavor. They can make a really good fighty variant. I quite like the variant Sam brought with the Power Scourge and the Fist, and then they can have the normal shooty variants, like the other one he brought, and then sometimes, a sixth of the time, if you wound them or something like that, they get to do extra stuff, which is really cool. Not something to be relied upon, but it's a nice little bit of extra flavor, and their profile doesn't ever degrade or anything. So them taking a couple wounds or something from like an Overwatch or a stray shot here or there is sometimes in your favor, which is really awesome. I continue to like Marines and Rhinos every time I've played against that a few times now, and it just seems really good. I'm always forced to kind of ignore them until they get out of the Rhinos. I have not yet played against an army that is almost entirely mechanized. There'll typically be like the mechanized portion and then the non-mechanized portion, and that's what I'll usually focus on, and then sort of force the Marines out of the Rhinos, and then I'll get them that way. But if I was to play against an army that was fully mechanized, I would kind of have no choice but to charge the Rhinos, probably do some ineffectual damage, and then the Rhinos would all withdraw, the guys would get out, and I would take a lot of firepower. So I'm actually kind of interested to see how that plays. I don't know if anyone has an army like that in my area. I don't know everybody super well. There's a lot of new faces and things like that. But I will definitely try to get a game in like that because I think it would be really interesting. Um, we did decide to play with the ITC kill points mission. I highly recommend all the ITC missions. They're way better than the ones in the books, way more fair. The +1 to go first in particular is way more fair. I won't get into the specifics of why. If you're curious about my thoughts on it, you can definitely leave a comment on this or get at me some other way. But coming from Age of Sigmar, where there's only a few viable armies for the tip-top tournament play, they also require you to have very few deployments. So, like, one really good tournament army has like two deployments, one has like four, one has five or six, stuff like that, because it's kind of an arms race to be able to get that guaranteed first turn. Now, Seize the Initiative throws a little bit of a wrench into that in 40k. Some people think that's enough. I don't agree. 40k is such a shooting based game that you need that uncertainty, or some armies just aren't going to be viable. You know, some of the lighter, faster armies like Dark Eldar, regular Eldar for that matter, Harlequins, stuff like that, where if they can't even have a chance at first turn, they're going to get shot off the table and they're going to probably not really be viable anymore, which would be really boring. And that kind of makes the game worse on everybody from a competitive standpoint, in my opinion. But yeah, and the kill points mission is particularly good because some armies just don't have very many units, and then it's like, oh, okay, well, there's almost no chance I can win this game. That's not very interesting. Moving it to power level, which is what the ITC guys did, while not a perfect solution, is much more balanced and much more fun to play. So that didn't end up coming up into play this game, but I was happy that we went ahead and did that. Um, Focusing on my side of the table for the game, I didn't make many mistakes this game. I made a couple. A big noticeable one was leaving my weird boy that jumped with my pink unit. I just forgot about him 2 turns in a row, so I didn't get any smites with him for 2 turns. He didn't get any charges, which would have been helpful because he's actually pretty good in combat, especially against the non-fighty Hellbrute that can't really punch him to death because it doesn't have multiple damage or anything like that. That would have been really helpful. So that's just a mental error. I had guys all over the table. I was running around taking pictures and stuff like that, and I just need to be a little more cognizant of where my models are and stuff. It also doesn't help that I was proxying a lot. I've been having trouble getting certain models from my local stores that I want to use for my weird boys and my bikes and things like that. So I'm forced to proxy, and I had 2 grots as a proxy, which are just like the smallest models that are very hard to notice. They're not painted or anything, so just visually it's difficult to keep up with them. I also, let's see here. Um, I probably left my Warlord a little bit exposed. I was going to try a charge with him into the Space Marine bikes, but he didn't make it. But in hindsight, I probably should have just had him in the back anyways because he hits very hard, but he's not very durable. He only has a 4+ save, and that's it, unless like Grotsnick's around or something like that. So the Demon Prince should have killed him. I just rolled exceptionally well. I rolled 3 6s out of 6 dice, which is, I mean, that's not going to happen again ever. So I need to be a little more careful with his positioning and use him more as a counterpunch piece against, especially when my opponent has like more maneuverable guys of their own as well. So if I had pulled him back a little bit and fed the Demon Prince something else, like had him get into a unit or gave him a weird boy or something like that, then I kind of counterattacked and he would have really shined a lot more. So that was definitely a positional error as well. And then there was the small positional error that I brought up in the battle report where I didn't put one of my weird boys close enough to a Hellbrute to smite it on turn 1. I was about an inch out, or turn 1 or turn 2, I don't remember. So that's just giving up free damage, which is definitely a bad thing, especially against vehicles, which orcs can have a little bit of trouble with, depending on what they are. But so that's just something I need to be a little bit more aware. I did move him, but I didn't move him up enough. I moved him mostly to the side. So if I'd been a little bit more thinking through the turn and okay, what do I want this guy to do? What do I want this guy to do? What do I want this guy to do? Then I would have been able to get D3 or D6 mortal wounds with him, which would have helped kill that Hellbrute a little bit quicker, which in turn frees up my unit to reinforce somewhere else, and that would have been definitely stronger. So yeah, just some small positional things there. Most of the game came down to the big scrum in the middle, where I was kind of eating through the meat of his army. So there wasn't much to be done there. It was just a lot of us rolling dice back and forth at each other. From Sam's perspective, he definitely kind of said screw it this game and took the fight to me. Generally, not something that anyone's ever going to do, especially in kill points. One of the reasons I don't like the Eternal War missions is because they are very one-dimensional, because you only score at the end of the game. Typically, one player is the aggressor and one player is the defender. So the defender is just going to like castle up, pull back, play super boring in my opinion, while the aggressor has to make all the big decisions and kind of force things and stuff like that. Whereas if you play like Maelstrom or missions that score as you go, both players have to be very involved in the game, and things typically get going a little bit more quicker, and it's a little bit more fast and deadly, which I think is good, and the way 8th edition is meant to be played. So I'm really looking forward to getting some Maelstrom games in, and or seeing what the ITC guys or other big tournament coordinators do with those missions, because I just don't think scoring at the end of the game is very conducive to a fun and tactical game. Yeah, so he just came right at me. Generally, that's going to be a mistake. As you could see, I was able to get into combat on my turn one. That's never happened before and probably will never happen again. Even other assault armies would generally shoot me up a little bit just because I have so many guys. It's really hard to chew through all that. The bikes failing the charge was bad. They could have gotten quite a few attacks into the purple unit that was getting shot up pretty badly. I think his hope was to kind of like wipe them out, or maybe blow command points to at least keep the few guys around. And then, yeah, I was gonna counterattack him pretty hard, but uh, I would only have a few things available to do that with, and then maybe with the Demon Princes and some fire support and all that kind of stuff, he had a chance at at chewing it through. I could definitely see the logic in that. Pulling back and just shooting is probably the right thing to do, but it does free me up to do a little bit more. Like I have quite a few psychers, so I'm gonna get some smites off. All of his units are very vulnerable to that. I have teleport and things like that, so I can kind of encircle him a little bit. So there's some cause to worry about letting me take all the initiative. So I can definitely see where he's coming from on that. I think deployment was a big problem for Chaos. I probably would have just castled up. That's almost always the right thing to do in kill points, especially when you're the quote unquote defender player. But my army has to kind of spread out on the table because I have so much volume, whereas his is a lot smaller, and he could have maybe come to him and eat through a lot more with less of my army, and also cut down on my ability to get use out of like the jump, so I could deep strike around stuff like that. So since he was spread out a little bit, I was able to apply as much force as I needed to where I needed to, and kind of, okay, I'm gonna jump over here, kill this Havoc squad, I'm gonna jump over there, deal with that Havoc squad, kind of just put everything where I needed to. And then because I have just so many more guys, that's playing right into my hands. So deployment, definitely something to really think about. Typically when you're playing against a larger army, especially quite a bit of a larger one, like some Tyranids, Orks, not Guard as much because they shoot, but sometimes Guard, you want to concentrate force in a small area, whereas they have to kind of spread their army out because there's just not physically enough room to focus on one area of the table. But that's something Marines can do very well. So I would have, been forced to bring my army in kind of like a diagonal direction or something like that into one of the corners, and then I don't get to fight with as much as my army as I would normally do. That's something I brought up during the first time I played Michael, the Dark Angels player, in one of my past battle reports. So I think that was something that Sam was probably aware of. Again, like I said, he's sometimes a little bit more of a fluffy player, more casual, things like that. So I don't think he was exactly focused on doing that kind of stuff, but it's worth bringing up, just because I want to talk about ways to improve and things that I saw that could have been changed from more of a competitive standpoint. So those were probably the biggest things. Is yeah, I just got to fight wherever I wanted to with whatever I wanted to, um, and that's just plays into my hands so strongly. And you could just see that snowballed out of control with me winning everywhere basically. I have like 3 units I can fight with in the middle. I'm winning everything there. I have a unit or two on the flank, or the left flank, so I'm able to slowly eat through his stuff there while holding it out with my deep strike unit. I could put another deep strike unit over this corner of the table once I start spreading him out a little bit, and it was too much for his army to be able to deal with. He can't be everywhere at once with the numbers like I can. That's what Orks do very well. So that and then once the game starts down that path, it's very difficult to pull out of that. It was just kind of from turn one, I felt extremely advantaged just because I recognized, okay, I have free reign to do whatever I want. So yeah, if you're playing any kind of more elite army or something like that, I would definitely advise going the other way. Bunker up, make your opponent come to you, and then sell each of your models as dearly as you can because you don't have as many as your opponents do. Um, so yeah, that's pretty much the story of this game. I like this list a lot. I like it a lot more than the version with the rockets and stuff like that. Having the three war bosses continues to be awesome. I've pretty much got the deployment down for the big mechs, being able to cover my guys on turns 1 and 2. Having them on bikes makes it a lot easier and it makes them a lot more resilient. I'm really liking the weird boys. I think they give me a chance against some of the more competitive lists that are like using a lot of flyers and things like that. But I don't have so many that it's taking up a big portion of my army, so I can still use their spells. I have two guys with jump, two guys with warpath. Both of those are really excellent spells. And then my boys units are very focused. I have two big shooters because I had some remaining points that I put into the pink unit because they're my usual deep strike target when that goes off. So I was like, we'll give them some extra guns. And then I've been trying, starting with this game, to use two shooter units because I was noticing that in each of my games I had a unit that would take very little damage, but would also not really do anything. So I was bringing 6 squads of boys to the table, but I was really only fighting and losing guys with 5 of them. So I was like, okay, what can I do to get a little more mileage out of these guys? And my solution was to turn one of them into a shooter boys unit. So my chopper boys all deploy very up front, and the shooter boys kind of deploy more in the back and bring up the rear. And they're also good targets for it to jump, since I have 2 guys that can do that now because they can jump around, shoot a lot, and then try to charge instead of having to charge to do damage like the Choppa Boys do. So I think I like that a lot. I didn't get to really show it off this game because my blue squad was the other one that I was trying out with the shooters, and they got charged by Terminators right away, so I had to kind of get them unentangled. And then by the time they got into stuff, it was like everything was in combat, so I didn't really get to do any shooting. But I think as I play, other armies in the future, that'll really pay off more. I'm especially excited about it against like Guard, Tau, stuff like that, where being able to drop around and shoot up some smaller units and things like that is quite powerful. So that's a good mix, I feel, in my list. I'm still definitely lacking a ranged presence against transports, but I honestly don't think orcs can do anything about that. I just don't think orcs have the tools to deal with transports at range. As a foot army, you can deal with it if you're bringing like a lot of dreadnoughts or something like that. But in general, orc guns are just bad. Hitting on fives is just not good enough. You have to bring way too much volume, and the orc units are too expensive. Everything's too expensive to be able to do that. So I'd rather just accept it for what it is, not try to smooth out that rough edge, and just deal with it. I can punch through transports pretty well, especially with the war bosses, reinforcing where I need to and stuff like that. I have guys to eat Overwatch. There's very few armies that I'm concerned about. Like Sisters of Battle would be one, because immolators are just very insane. Guard would be another one because the Baneblade variants that can take 4 twin heavy flamers. I don't think orcs can beat that, like, without a very tailored list. It's just too much. So a couple things like that if I saw across from the table, I'd be like, okay, I have a really uphill battle here. But in general, I feel good about the list and think it's probably one of the more competitive builds that orcs can bring. I just don't think that orcs work as a mechanized army, especially with the nerf to battle wagons that came out with the FAQ. Nerf clarification, depends on how you want to look at it. I don't think the Storm Boys build that people have been touting around is strong, especially because rules is written. If Storm Boys advance, they always die on ones, even if there's a war boss nearby, which is horrible. The the Dreadnought armies like Canwall, stuff like that, they have big problems with certain types of lists. They're more for fun. They're fun to play, but they're not super competitive. It's really everything leads me back to Green Tide. So if you're an Orc player out there, that's where I'm at right now. It's where my head's at. I'd love to have a discussion about it. But I haven't seen any compelling builds or arguments to the contrary when I look at Orc stuff. Same with my beliefs on Tau, having only a couple viable builds, and I'm going hard after those as well. So yeah, thanks for watching again. Probably going to be a little bit lighter on battle reports for the rest of the week. I've been playing a lot lately. I have some personal stuff I need to catch up on. I probably will get a game or two in the rest of the week, but we'll see how it goes. So yeah, if you have any comments or anything like that, definitely hit me up on YouTube or on the blog or anything like that. I've been getting a lot more responses since I've been posting up on a couple other websites, which is fantastic. I really like when people have comments or questions or anything. Just good to get feedback and know that somebody's out there paying attention to this stuff. So yeah, until I throw up another one of these, thanks for watching.